Asked Gary Glenn to give us a little bit of a historical perspective here. What happened in Idaho, what they were facing at that time, and where do they kind of relate to us here in Michigan. Gary Glenn.
Thank you, Randy.
Idaho, in 1958, the year I was born, had right to work on the ballot, and it failed by 1,000 votes. It was on the ballot in 6 states that same year, and all the other 6 except Kansas also failed. The only one that succeeded in 1958 was Kansas, so I was about 6 months old. Then there was Wyoming in 1963. I don't know honestly whether, I think that was also by a ballot vote, but I'm not sure on that one. In 1976 was Louisiana by a vote of the legislature. The lobbyist, chief lobbyist, guy who had the same position I did in Idaho, was shot to death right after it passed, came in out of a celebration party. The Democratic governor was expected to veto it, but in the public uproar over the right to work lobbyist being killed with a shotgun in the back as he came out of the hotel, the governor actually signed that one into law. Then Idaho in 1986 by vote of the legislature, and in 2001 in Oklahoma by vote of the legislature to put it on the ballot. There are some lessons to be learned as we look to other states that might consider becoming right-to-work states, and I think some of those lessons are these. 5 states have seriously tried to enact right-to-work since Louisiana in 1976, and including that state. 3 of them got legislative approval first, and those 3 states have right-to-work laws. 2 states, Colorado and Missouri, tried to do it without going to the legislature, just went straight onto the ballot, tried to go toe-to-toe, get outspent 2, 3, 4 to 1, and both of them lost 57-43. So one of the lessons I think to be learned from the experience and history of right to work in the last 35 years is that, and we found this in our polling in Idaho, of how important it was to voters in the face of $1 million worth of TV ads saying that this would destroy the economy, destroy jobs, cut your wages in half, take away health insurance, lead to greater rates of teenage pregnancy, no kidding, put people in jail, how important it was that their elected officials had considered and approved the issue first. That made people far more comfortable and willing to vote for it on the ballot. So the 2 states that have tried it in the last 35 years and failed did not go to the legislature first. The 3 states that succeeded did. So we're all products of our experience. There may even be division on this question here on the panel, but as a product of my experience, if Michigan wants to be a right-to-work state, in my opinion, we should bring it up for a vote in the legislature, even if it fails, because that provides a target list. And then continue to go through the elections until we have enough, as we did in Idaho. We had to take out 15 Republicans in order to pass right-to-work, including 2 Senate committee chairmen. The Republican Party in Idaho actually passed a resolution in 1981 urging the legislature to kill right-to-work. Not because they disagreed with it philosophically, but because they were convinced that it would cost them seats in the legislature. And one year, the conservative senior U.S. Senator from Idaho, Jim McClure, who was a supporter of a national right-to-work law, personally called Republican state senators and urged them to kill the bill that year so that it wouldn't have detrimental effect on the gubernatorial election in the next election. Now, 5 years later, right to work on the ballot got 30,000 votes more than the highest Republican vote getter, to show you how much those Republican officials knew back in Idaho. But right to work, here's the messaging that we found effective in Idaho. Right to work is a freedom of choice issue. It's a matter of individual freedom of choice. Every employee should be free to join and pay dues to a union if they choose. They should be equally free to choose not to join and pay dues to a union and not be discriminated against and fired for making the choice either way. It is a civil rights issue. One of the people who spoke in favor of Idaho's right-to-work law was the president of the Boise Postal Workers Union, was an African-American. And he said, federal law makes it illegal to discriminate against and fire me on the basis of membership or non-membership in a certain race, creed, color, or sex. It ought to be equally illegal to discriminate against and fire me on the basis of membership or non-membership or financial support or non-support of a private, hyper-political labor organization, which have turned in some of the most militant left-wing voices and infrastructure of the left. I mean, folks, in the free marketplace of ideas, unions and the political party they support could not survive if they had to compete with the rest of us like we have to with voluntary contributions. They are kept alive only on the artificial life support of compulsion. Imagine how preposterous it would be if the Tea Party movement said, we are so convinced that we provide a benefit to the entire community, including those who disagree with us, that we should have the power under law to compel financial support from individuals who disagree with us, or have them fired from their jobs. I mean, any group that purported to have that type of authority would be laughed out of the public policy arena. It is also a moral issue. I think it's a matter of violation of religious conscience and religious freedom. Frankly, I think if it ever is on the ballot in Michigan, this will be the aspect of this issue that will give it a chance of actually passing, because it will put union members themselves in a moral dilemma. Here's the greatest example I can give you. I'm one of the two co-authors of the Marriage Protection Amendment that was on the ballot in 2004. According to pre-election and post-election polls, 2/3 of all union households, Terry said 40% are conservative, but on this question, 2/3, 66% of union households voted in favor of the Marriage Protection Amendment, saying marriage should remain only between one man and one woman here in Michigan. And yet, those employees, Christians and others, whether as a matter of conscience or religious conviction or morality, might sit in the pews every Sunday morning, but they were compelled, and still to this day are compelled, to give money to organizations which campaigned against the Marriage Protection Amendment. That's simply immoral, and it ought to be illegal. When the Marriage Protection Amendment was approved by the voters, the ACLU filed a lawsuit to overturn it. Do you know who the plaintiff was? You may not have heard of the group, but it was called Pride at Work, AFL-CIO. It's the AFL-CIO's own in-house homosexual activist group, whose logo is, and I didn't make this up, is a clenched fist under which it says, Proud Union Queer. That's their logo. So you have 2/3 of union members in Michigan who voted for the amendment and were compelled under threat of being fired to help campaign against it through their compulsory union dues. Thomas Jefferson said it is both sinful and tyrannical to compel a man to provide funding for the propagation of opinions he disbelieves, and certainly I agree with that, and right to work makes that illegal. Now, in addition to it being a freedom issue, and we really miss the boat, folks, in my opinion, if we make the argument first that we need to pass right to work because we need jobs. It certainly is one of the most, first of all, it wouldn't cost taxpayers a dime to pass a right to work law, and no other measure the state government could take would have a more dramatic effect on making Michigan a magnet to become once again the industrial powerhouse of the Great Lakes region in the Midwest with our existing infrastructure in the Great Lakes. If you ever think Michigan's going to become a right-to-work state, buy commercial property on the border with Indiana and Ohio and Illinois, because it always happens. Manufacturing facilities in those states will move north of the border just so they can be in a right-to-work environment. Some of the things that Vinnie mentioned about population growth. Right-to-work states will gain 11 congressional seats in the next reapportionment. Non-right-to-work states will lose 9. USA Today said about Idaho, Idaho has been tops among states in economic growth since 2003. It has ranked high nearly every year since 1987, a run of good times unmatched by any other state, and has added jobs every year since 1987. USA Today did not mention what happened in November of 1986. Idaho passed a right-to-work law. Within 18 months, became #1 in the nation in new job creation and per capita income growth. Oklahoma did the same thing in 2001, and within a year, #1 in the nation in per capita income growth and new job creation. Imagine what the industrial powerhouse of Michigan would do economically if we passed right to work. And yet, without right to work, in the decade of 1999 to 2009, the state with the biggest job loss in America was Michigan, over 800,000, nearly 900,000 jobs lost. The top 5 states for gaining employment were all right to work states. Folks, right now, this is how bad Michigan is. 2/3 of all right to work states now have higher per capita income than the state of Michigan. We're not only talking about your right to work without being forced to join or pay dues to a union. To coin a phrase on the reverse of what the union officials say about it, we're talking about your opportunity and right to work for more. If you look at the 2/3 of states across the country that have right to work laws, and these are some of those decrepit third world economy type states like Florida and Iowa and Kansas, Louisiana, Nebraska, Nevada. Nevada, by the way, has about the same percentage of the workforce unionized as Michigan does, and it's all voluntary. It's not union busting. It doesn't ban unions, even though you won't believe the ignorant statements you'll hear them say, well, this is going to do away with unions. This is going to destroy unions. Let me pass some ammunition. If somebody tells you something like that, ask them if the First Amendment is church busting. Or is the First Amendment anti-religion? Because it gives you the freedom to choose the church of your choice or no church at all. North Carolina, North Dakota, Oklahoma, South Dakota, Tennessee, Texas, Virginia, and Wyoming. All of those states with higher per capita income than the state of Michigan. Now, in Idaho, it took us 10 years. It took us 4 different legislative sessions to have votes up in which we failed by various turns of events, and I won't go into the details, but finally, after we elected a veto-proof legislature in 1984, we had enough votes to override the Democratic governor's veto. It's the only state right-to-work law that was put into effect by overriding a gubernatorial veto. And 75% of the legislature voted in favor. We had to take out a bunch of Republicans to get to that, who were against right-to-work. Unions gathered enough signatures to put it on the ballot in 1986, outspent us 3 million to 1 million, and we won with 54% of the vote nonetheless. In Oklahoma, when it was on the ballot in 2001, also won 54-46. Louisiana did not go to the ballot because they don't have a mechanism to take something to the ballot after it's passed the legislature. But again, going back to the point I made earlier, the 2 statewide ballot votes that had first gone through the legislature, one in Oklahoma, one in Idaho, both won 54-46. The 2 states, Missouri and Colorado, that tried to go directly to the ballot without having built the political infrastructure of support, both failed 57-43. In Colorado, it was November of 2008. That's the newest one. And right-to-work opponents spent $35 million in a state of roughly 3 million people. Michigan's 2.5 times larger, so if you looked at a similar per capita expenditure from right-to-work opponents in the state of Michigan, you'd be looking at $90 million or more in opposition. I think because of the historical significance Michigan is to the organized labor movement, it would be even more than that. You'd have money coming in from union federations around the world. You'd be looking at 100 million perhaps or more. It will be unlike anything you have ever seen. You know, it's not every issue that when it passes, the lobbyist gets shot in the back coming out of the celebration party. Thankfully, we didn't have that kind of thing happen to us in Idaho. But the other thing that we learned from the Idaho experience is, and I would offer this as a critique of how I've seen the right-to-work issue portrayed so far in Michigan. There was even an infamous quote by a very wealthy and prominent political person that Michigan needs a right-to-work state because employees are making too much money. That ain't going to settle. The chairman of our committee was a 12-year member of the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers. The co-chairman of our committee was a member of the United Food and Commercial Workers Union, a checker at a grocery store. A Teamster forklift driver became chairman of union members for Right to Work, which was made up of pipe fitters and Teamsters and steel workers. The face of this issue has to be the individual employee, not some corporate CEO out of a skyscraper in Detroit or Grand Rapids talking about how it will improve their business's bottom line. That's not going to fly. It's got to be an individual employee issue, a job-creating issue. The name of our ballot committee was Idaho Citizens for Freedom and Jobs. There's been a lot of big talk for the last 2 or 3 years about this issue. But what I think has to happen, should have happened 6 months ago, and that is there has to be an organization whose sole focus and commitment is to passing right to work to the exclusion of all other issues, that's not going to be looking to cut deals, that's not afraid to put heat on Republicans, even those who support it. Right now in the Michigan House, there are people who support right to work, but who are calculating the political ramifications and may choose not to bring it up because they fear that it might cause some people to get defeated in the next election. That was the song and dance we heard out in Idaho, because this will hurt Republicans. Even though from 1978 until 1984, the number of Republicans in the legislature, while right to work was the hottest issue in the state, grew every single election, up until the point after 1984 we had a veto-proof Republican legislature. You're going to hear that same kind of argument now. But there was an outside organization, didn't care where anybody stood on any other issue, that put the heat even on the supporters to actually act, to do something. I think we'll be seriously looking at having a right-to-work law when there is a Michigan Right-to-Work Committee whose sole and exclusive focus is pursuing and pressuring the legislature to act on that bill. And wherever the funding may come from, I think that's one of the prerequisites of having a serious talk about making this a reality for us here in Michigan. I would like, with my family, I got my 13-year-old son Jefferson sitting back there with me, I'd like for him to be able to grow up in a state where he can be judged on the merits and abilities that he brings to a job, and when not face discrimination or firing or any type of penalty because he makes a choice and exercises his conscience, whether it's based on morality, religious conviction, or personal political conviction. We all know that the unions have become nothing but the modus operandi of the Democratic Party. 40% of union members are Republicans and are compelled as a condition of employment under threat of being fired to fund the opposition political party whose candidates they don't support. It's un-American, it's wrong, it ought to be illegal.
Amen to that, Gary. Thank you very much.